talking points from the world of non-league football. And each week I do wonder if we will run out of content to speak about, but the non-league game is not letting us down. And during this unprecedented time, each week there are developments. And for tonight's show, I'm really delighted that we have two fantastic guests. Jim Cooper, Gray's athletic manager, and Heybridge Swifts chairman Gary White are alongside me this evening. Gents, how are you both?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah.
Gary, how are you keeping?
Enjoying the sunshine when I can get outside. It's lovely. Makes all the difference.
It is absolutely gorgeous, isn't it? And week by week, since the 16th of March now was the last time a ball was kicked. It's felt like a lifetime. But we've been assessing and analysing the different tiers of the pyramid and their approach to this game. And whilst I know you both have come to terms with your team's seasons being null and void, Jim, this time last week, myself, you and Neil were talking about the National League and their vote. And it seems like they have come to, would we say, a half decision, because there are still so many questions left unanswered. But what did you make of the National League's decision to suspend all of the games remaining this season?
Not really a surprise, if I'm honest. I thought that's how the vote would go. Whether or not that's a half decision or not, I read something in their statement which I picked up on, and I can quote it because I wrote it down. I think it's worth discussing. Basically, throughout, they made the decision with 90% of the vote, and then they said to enable clubs to make business decisions with greater clarity as soon as possible. Now, I'm reading between the lines there, saying that, well, that's it. You know, they're not going to be doing any playoffs, which is still some conjecture about, you know, are they going to make promotion or relegation? From that statement, I think they're saying that the season now is null and void. Mr.
Cooper, you and I are so similar. Here in my back of the net notebook, I have picked up that very quote myself. I mean, Gary, I don't know, have you read the statement from the National League? Because although it was relatively short and sweet, there were, including that sentence, a few little hints, I think, that really caught my attention. And that one about the business decisions. Ultimately, do you think chairmen of clubs in the National League wanted a decision and weren't prepared to wait much longer for one?
I guess it's a case of that. I suppose it's with the furloughing of staff and players, you know, that they just needed to know what sort of period they would do that over. And also, I guess, really, when it comes to looking at sponsorship for next season, what do you do? What do you say to prospective sponsors? You know, I think it's those sort of decisions I think that they're referring to or alluding to, I would imagine. Yeah, I've seen other sort of stuff out saying, you know, nothing's going to happen until January, or the next season will start in January, and then they'll extend this existing season till later in the year. There's lots of stuff going around, so I'm tending to sort of ignore it until it's something firm and clear and decisive. You know, that's my take on it. You know.
And as the chairman of a football club, in the leadership position that you have, and the sort of legal, financial responsibilities that the position of a chairman holds, do you feel a little bit disappointed that you and your club didn't get a vote or say like your National League colleagues? Or do you think actually the position that the Isthmian League took was more pragmatic? Because one of the things that, Jim, I wonder if you feel the same, that I noted in that press release was that they said that some clubs had voted and others had yet to respond. So when I was under the impression the whole league had voted, actually, when you scratch away at the surface, it becomes unclear. Would a vote have made things more complicated from your point of view, Gary?
I think you would, really, yeah, because people have voted about something that they don't, you know, they really haven't got a clue on the answer. It sounds like Brexit, really, I guess, you know. It's the unknown, and how do you vote for something? Because they probably would have come up with the same sort of story and the same outcome. And you know, I noticed yesterday some notes from the Isthmian League whereby the chairman, Nick Robinson, has said that one club has instructed a solicitor against them. You know, to me, that's a bit unfair, really. I think I probably know which club it is, to be honest, but I'm not going to criticise them for it, because we would possibly consider doing the same ourselves, albeit we would have spoken to the league first. How do you do that? Who's right and who's wrong? There's no right or wrong answer, because whatever way you'll do it, it's a case of damned if you do and damned if you don't. So I've got every sympathy really with the governing bodies, and because like the rest of us, we're all sort of feeling our way along as we go.
And Jim, I know we've spoken about this a lot on the Extra Time show, the different layers of complexity, and the point that because football means ever so much to so many of us across the country, we almost hold it in a moral standing that we want all the processes to be flawless and we want everyone to have a fair, equal say. But arguably, from what Neil told us last week, it didn't feel quite fair when every club in the National League had a vote, but those in the South and the North didn't. And then the statement again just had me scratching my head a little bit, in that there are clubs that still haven't responded. There are clubs that still haven't had a vote. Was there not a deadline? It's all really complex still, isn't it? Even when it seems like a decision's made, it's very puzzling.
Well, I think I said last week that it's a very, very difficult position for the leagues to ask people to vote upon. There's the statement said I think 90% of the clubs had voted, and regardless of what the final 10% would say, it won't affect the actual final result. So they still want their views moving forward. It is such a strange one. You asked Gary in relation to the Isthmian League. I think at our level, I think it was the Northern League, Northern Premier wanted it to continue. I think that the Ryman or Isthmian, should I say, didn't want it to, and the Southern League may have been split. I think, and the overriding factor, I think, then basically went with the Isthmian decision to cancel and null and void. But you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. I think the only thing I would say is that I would find it very, very strange that if steps 1 and 2 don't follow the same as steps 3 below. I don't think that's what should happen personally, because I also think that, as I said last week, I think that certainly in our league, Gary may not want me to say this. I think Malden probably deserve to go up as champions.
Oh yeah.
I know they're close to you, Gary. That's what I was saying. But as last year, Heybridge won the playoffs last year and didn't go up. And that was a travesty last season. So, like I say, it's a difficult position the leagues find themselves in. But again, they just need to again find some clarity and set a deadline.
And you're really right. These are difficult decisions. And I guess we have the luxury of dissecting them and sharing our opinions. But of course, Back of the Net is here for supporters of clubs to have their say as well. We really want you to be part of this conversation. We ran a poll on our Twitter channel yesterday, which I will share with the guys a little bit later on, about what should now happen in terms of the 2019-20 campaign. Should it be points per game? Should the season just now be voided? We're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but do share your thoughts and comments with us. We've had some tweets already that we will share a little bit later on in the show, but we would like to know what your opinion is. Perhaps I think quite a lot of people watching, if their clubs didn't have a great deal to play for, there'll be a sense of relief that a decision has been made, Gary. And I think the luxury of having both you and Jim on is that we get the perspective of a manager and a perspective of a chairman. Yes. And a chairman's perspective is particularly unique because I think, myself included to a great degree, we don't necessarily have an understanding of quite the level of finances that's required to operate at non-league level now. Did you feel any sense of relief when the league made a decision, whether, no one wants to see a season null and void, but there is an element at least of clarity and you can begin to at least build for the future? Or is it just too hard to even think about building for the future right now?
I think it's still difficult, and going back to the business decisions that was referred to earlier on with the context of the National League, we don't know when the new season is going to start. And if you take out Heybridge Swiss as an example, we've got plans to get a 3G pitch down. We've got planning permission for it, and I was in the process of arranging the financing for it. Now, at the moment, that's all been thrown back up in the air because obviously there's bigger demands on finance from other sort of places and commercial businesses and that sort of stuff. So the loans or whatever that we were going to get may be harder to come by now. But now we've got the other unknown in that we don't know when the season's going to restart. So what we don't want to do is incur that sort of money and have a debt hanging over us with no revenue coming in to service it from. So another great big unknown in our case is that. So it's hard enough to plan for a season ahead because it is all about sponsorship. You have to get your sponsors on board. Unfortunately, the costs of running the club and the wages you pay and everything, gate receipts are nowhere near that. And we're talking as the club that probably third highest crowds in the division, or fourth, or something like that. So you need a bar that's functioning and generating profits, and you need good sponsors. Now, when the bar's closed and you don't know when the sponsors are going to come back on, because you can't give them clarity as to when the season's going to start, and you don't know what sort of financial condition those businesses are going to be in themselves because of the close down, there's massive unknown. So, even if you knew when the season was going to start, you'd like to think it would be about September time. Then you've got something to plan for. And I think, from a business point of view, certainty, if you can create some degree of certainty, that's very, very important.
And business has already kind of come up as the key word in this evening's show. Jim, it's one that you highlighted in the National League statement on Wednesday, and myself too. And it's not necessarily a word that people like to associate with the game that they love so passionately, business, but you've been involved in the game for a very long time now, and you know exactly how it operates. And ultimately, if non-league clubs that have been around for decades and even longer are going to survive, the competition almost needs to arguably be put to one side and business decisions need to be made. Do you think the decision to not play the rest of the games was simply of that nature? It was a business decision?
Oh, that's a good question. The answer to that, I really don't know. I don't know what actually was the real reason for the discontinuation of our level, for sure. Gary is quite right. Avery Swifts and every other non-league club had their bar. They probably rent their bar out and rely on takings throughout the summer to sustain the business model that they've got. And it's interesting because I was speaking to a National League manager the other day who said that he can't see that that every single club in non-league will have to reduce their budgets this year because of what's gone on. So, and as Gary said, when does the season start? When can you, if clubs are in a position where they can offer contracts to players, when are they going to offer them the contracts? Because if they're going to start paying them in August, it doesn't start till October time, then again that's money that's been thrown away, for want of a better word, I suppose. Really, I couldn't tell you the reason why, in my opinion, why the league made that decision. I would imagine that from a business point of view, that had a major understanding within that.
I'm sure if we were to have a stab at it, it probably is due to the clubs, their chairman, their boards just wanting a bit of a definitive answer. On a sort of note on the practical side and of the footballing, like Jim's alluded to there, one of the things we love in the off season is the kind of the rumour mill, and especially in non-league, seeing where managers go and players often follow. It's still obviously a conversation, Gary, that you can't have with your manager because it is still such an unsure and delicate situation. Do you think in the coming weeks we will see the leagues provide a little bit of guidance for how clubs should be operating, or is it going to be a bit of a war out there in terms of managers and players beginning to send messages and the recruitment starting now?
Yeah, I think there's going to be an element of that, really. I was planning if I was going to do a message today, put it on our website just to sort of keep everyone informed. We've got the same management team for next season, and it's important that we make that statement. Everyone's committed and on board, and that's important in terms of player retention.
That's a massive thing, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. Yeah, it's important that we make that point. And we had a Zoom meeting the other day. There was 4 or 5 of us on there: Carl Duguid, Steve Spreadbury. And one of the questions that came to me is that, well, are we going to be looking at the same budget next season as this season? And we just can't answer that question. It's so difficult to say. Obviously, the intention would be that we would, but in the current sort of circumstances, and we don't know what the economy is going to be like once we, get back to normal. Because some of the doomsayers are prophesying some pretty bad sort of recession and that sort of stuff. And it could change the landscape totally. So I think a lot of clubs will struggle budget-wise. I'm not just saying that's because we feel we may be. It's just that huge uncertainty that no one knows the answer. And it could be that we bounce back very quickly. I've seen some fantastic examples of companies and businesses showing unbelievable ingenuity and resourcefulness during this lockdown. And we've come up with a couple of ideas of things that we've had to do that we've said, well, why don't we always do that as a business? We should have been. It just saves us hours, hundreds of man hours each year, and generates more revenue and brings in so many more businesses and clients and stuff like that. So there's lots of good coming out of it as well. But it's again, it's this huge unknown. If someone said to me now, do a budget for next season to Hayward Swifts, I would say, well, give me the crystal ball first, and then I'll have a chance. You can budget what you like, but you've got to be very careful.
Yeah, if you ever do get any foresight from that crystal ball, please do share it with us, because I am like twitching to go out and watch some football. I don't know about you guys, watching Match of the Day last Saturday. Yeah, it was brilliant. All these vintage games, and just to see a bit of action on our TVs was fantastic. And Jim, have you had any conversations with I guess colleagues and friends that you've built in the game, managers, because it must be a really precarious situation, because obviously we're all extremely sensitive to the fact that there's a lot more going on now than football, but also we have been in lockdown for a very long while now. We do want to look ahead, we do want to be positive, and we know as well that football can be mercenary, it can be very ruthless. And if you've seen that there's a striker available that's going to bag you 20 goals, would you drop them a little text right now? What's kind of the word on the WhatsApp groups of non-league managers?
Stop talking about Matt Price.
Well, yeah, I'll speak to you about him off air, Gary. Yeah. No, I mean, of course it would. I mean, the season's over. It's been null and void at our level. So I've been planning for next season, as I'm sure Carl has at Hayward, as every other non-league manager that I'm talking to on various WhatsApp groups, etc. And we're planning for next season. As and when that started, we don't know, but we know at Grays what we need, what we want. But again, as Gary said, Carl mentioned to me, is the budget going to be the same? We don't know what the budget is going to be like at Grays. Just on that point, I want to throw this. It's 10 years to the day that sadly Grays Athletic played their last game at the Old Rec. So it's from the Thurrock Council. It's this, get your finger out and get us a ground somewhere, please.
That's gone quick. Wow.
And I think one of the things, before we go on to the poll that we ran and the next step in this process for the National League teams, I read a really interesting piece by Henry Winter, who is normally a pretty good voice in the good times and the bad times as a football writer. And he made the suggestion that if a bit of good was to come out of this, it would be at a certain level, probably not government, but certainly the governing bodies of the game, to look at wage structures in English football. And Premier League footballers have been hammered. I don't want to go on about that anymore. That's, that topic has been well and truly rinsed across the papers. But an argument being that potentially looking at elite football and a performance pay structure that could be adopted throughout the game would help massively. Do you think we have exposed with English football, Gary, basically just a dangerous way of operating that has kind of been unfolded with an awful pandemic, but still it was quite a fragile and precarious system anyway? And do you think we could use this pandemic to employ some better practice to make the level playing field in future more sustainable, but without taking reward away from those that are the best and perform the best as well?
Well, it's interesting. I watch a podcast every week by a guy called Kieran Maguire, who this podcast called The Price of Football, and he's a lecturer in accounting for football clubs at Liverpool University, and he's an absolute anorak, but he's brilliant. And he often talks about the accounts that EFL clubs are sort of filing at Companies House and that sort of stuff. And one of the stats that he shared recently was, I think it was that the average Championship club loses 15 million a year. That's every year. So they collectively had something like 300 million pounds worth of losses. So they're all gambling to get into the Premiership, because obviously there's this payday, because some Premiership clubs do actually make money. So you've got this massive gap between the Championship, where they're throwing money at it. And I think if you take Reading as an example, and Ben won't mind me mentioning this, Reading have got something like £200 million of the losses they've made in recent years. Now, if you said to me who plays for Reading, which sort of star striker have they got, you'd be hard pushed to say. Now, that's a Championship club that was in the Premiership a couple of times in the last 10 years, shedding money like left, right and centre. So Championship clubs are losing money hugely. And then if you start going down to League One, League Two, most of those clubs have got losses, even Accrington Stanley, who are now owned by a very successful businessman, very good guy called Andy Holt. They've got losses. They probably lose 1.5 a year. Leyton Orient last season, got promoted from the National League, of course, under Justin Edinburgh, West End, and I think they lost something like £3.5 million to do that. Their losses will be reduced this year because they're starting getting some Sky money by being, professional, league club, EFL club. But really, right across football, that is a common thing. I do track all the, believe it or not, I'm a bit of an anorak, so every time a set of accounts goes in for a football league club or a non-league club, I get a little email that flashes up if they're an limited company. It's the same in, like I said, I mentioned Leyton Orient, but I think the top 4 teams in the National League run at something like £1 million loss each. It's phenomenal.
Crazy.
And
the thing is, Jim, it's. Oh, sorry, Gary. The point I was just going to put to.
Sorry.
The point I was going to put to Jim is that actually we've seen that infiltrate into the lower leagues as well, haven't we? In recent years, there are a number of what we would consider high-profile clubs, the likes of Billericay, Dorking. Some of the figures associated with their run-ins for promotion have been absolutely staggering. And maybe this is an intervention, again, that will help make non-league football a bit more competitive, because if, say, the basic salaries were slightly more governed and it was performance-based, we might see a slightly fairer spread of talent and more competition, which in turn would hopefully drive attendances, drive exposure, and make football slightly fairer.
I think that's it sounds in principle very, very nice and wonderful idea in utopia, but that's not going to happen, because you're going to have and you can't knock clubs who have got a bigger budget. If they're well run and they do a lot of stuff off the pitch to gain sponsorship, to encourage the local community to attend the games, therefore getting money over the gate. And if they're successful as a result of that, then fine. I think the anomaly mentioned obviously was Billericay, and now the owner has now moved on to Romford. It won't make the blind bit of difference in relation to what Romford's budget's going to be next year. They will be strongly fancied because of the money that's going to be backed behind them. I think that just on the side in relation to the business side, I think that non-league, if we can start, before the Premier League and the Football League, I think that attendances will go up dramatically in non-league football, because I think the 2 reasons. One, obviously, because there's no other football being played and people are going to want their football fix. And also, secondly, I think that a lot of people have actually seen quite a bad side to professional football. And we mentioned Tottenham looking initially to furlough their players, and Liverpool, and that got mass bad publicity from the common man in relation to those clubs. And the non-league may get a bounce from this, and we'll wait and see.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and one, again, I think over the last couple of days I've been having a real feel about, because especially when you're looking towards Germany and France, where even in France they've been saying come mid-June, if athletes can have tests, that they'll be able to train again, which took me by surprise, really. I wasn't expecting that kind of earlier return, but there would be an argument for non-league football to potentially capitalise if, for example, crowds of up to 5,000 would be able to come together. There could be an opportunity there for non-league football to capitalise upon. But I guess, again, that's something we will have to wait and see over the next few weeks. And like I referred to at the start of the show, yesterday we ran a poll on our social media channels to gain a greater understanding of what you guys think at home should happen next. Again, when you see a press statement coming out from the National League, I thought it was going to give us all the conclusion that that we've been kind of waiting for all of these weeks, but ultimately it was just a decision on voiding the games from now until the end of the season. It wasn't a decision on the season as a whole, and that is still to be decided. So we put it out to our audience about what should happen next. Should the 2019-20 season be null and void in its entirety? Should points per game decide the league table? Should clubs finish on their current position, or should some other formula be devised to bring and draw a line under 2019-20? And unsurprisingly, give people a vote, and it's very close. It wasn't quite the 90%, but 47% ultimately cast a vote to null and void the season, 42% going on points per game, and 7% voting on the current position, and then an even smaller minority for other. Jim, starting with you, I'd like to ask you both, but Jim, starting with you, what should happen next? If out of those four options, what would you vote for?
I would vote for points per game, as I would have done at our level in our league as well. I think that's the fairest way. That's what I've gone with. Although it's not surprising that the vote ended that way. And
Gary, how about yourself? What do you think is the best thing for the National League to do?
I would stick with Jim on that one, points per game. It was our downfall last season, having won the playoffs. We didn't quite get enough points per game to get into that top 5 out of the 7. And if nothing else, it would be consistent with that, I guess. And it doesn't penalise clubs that have had a good cup run and stuff like that.
And we did get a couple of people reiterate that opinion that points per game would be the fairest. But I know of one club that got in contact with me who managed to climb out of the relegation zone and were on a really, really prolific run in their competition in the National League. If it was points per game, they'd get relegated by 0.02 of a point. So we almost think points per game is that fair way, but can you imagine getting relegated and you explain that to future fans? Oh, that 2019-20 season we were the informed team in our league, but there is, I guess, ultimately there are going to be winners and losers out of this, but it was interesting again, quite a lot of people saying that although they would have preferred the points per game, that they're quite keen for the National League to follow suit with the rest of the non-league football pyramid, i.e. going towards the null and void, Jim. And I know it's something we talked about with Neil last week. Do you think if the National League was to follow suit, it would, and null and void the season, it would at least share a sense of solidarity with the rest of the pyramid in that sense, and maybe stop a few more car crash moments of what has ultimately, given again the grand scheme of things, using a word like painful is not quite the right adjective, but it has just been a very unsettling way to conclude a season. And at least if it's null and void, everyone has kind of taken up the same thing, and moving forward we'll know that they're kind of, I guess, in a slight sense in it together.
Yeah, my own personal preference would have been for points per game for the same reasons as Gary mentioned as well. There's going to be winners and losers in that aspect. 0.0002 of a point or whatever its percentage. But then you've got teams that would have been promoted deservedly as well. So that's the flip side of the coin there. Yeah, my personal view is I think they should go along the whole, what they've done with step 3 below. I think it's the only fair way of doing it. It's not my ideal to say my ideal preference, but I think they should follow suit, and everyone's in the same boat.
And another suggestion, Gary, and one thing that a lot of football fans have been really keen to emphasise is this idea of the integrity of competition, and that people shouldn't benefit when they've had a poor season, and even more so teams that have had a good season should be rewarded and recognised. And some arguing that you would scrap relegation for a year and let teams be promoted, but I am inclined to think that that's not got a lot of weight really. But what are your thoughts? Should we reward the likes of Barrow and Wilston, and I can't think of the other teams at the top of their leagues, but should they just automatically get promotion because they've done okay? Because ultimately there was still about 8 to 10 games left. There was still a lot to be said for the season.
That's right. Well, it's weird again. There'll be winners and losers there, because if Stevenage don't get relegated, because I think they were rock bottom of League Two, looking pretty much sunk. And Barrow were comfortably ahead, as you say, in the National League. So again, one's going to agree with that, and one's going to be absolutely gutted. So it's got to stop somewhere, and I guess it really is where the EFL is down to them, really, if whether they allow Stevenage to get relegated and Barrow to come back up. In my case, I'm old enough to remember when Barrow were last in the Football League. I think they went down in 1972, I believe, when it was elections. It was an automatic promotion and relegation, and I think that's when Wimbledon came up. Jim, you're a bit younger than me, so you probably don't remember, so I'll let you off. But that's a long time ago. And Barrow, from what I gather, have been absolutely outstanding this season. Certainly from Jody, I think, when he played against them when he was at David and Redbridge, and he said they were an outstanding side with a great setup and really should be in the Football League. So again, winners and losers.
Yeah, and I think actually over the next few weeks, like, we've exhausted the topic, because obviously it is the most prominent thing for non-league and grassroots football right now. I'd be very surprised if in the next week or two we don't see a few more decisions made by the EFL, because each and every day there's a new chief executive, particularly for League Two and League One clubs, saying that they need the support, otherwise they're going to run out of business. And they're the teams that obviously everyone aspires to be in the Football League, don't they? The likes of Barrow and these big clubs in the National League. But if there's not that kind of financial stability for Leagues 1 and 2, it's going to have a really fragmented effect, isn't it? So there's still just so much to think about, and I'm really glad I'm not one of the people.
You can't win. No. It's like a referee, isn't it? A referee makes a marginal decision. There's 11 players screaming at him on each side. He makes his decision, and one of the 11 are happy, and the other 11 think he's a word I can't say. as well as the manager, like Jim, on the back, in the dugout there. That's the way it goes, isn't it? There's a
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. And the final topic I wanted to brush on, just because I was tuned into Sky Sports earlier today, and Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville. And Gary Neville, again, is probably one of the figureheads who's been very vocal about this whole debate, arguing that the Premier League needs to be doing more, something that I would agree with. But it was a really interesting and challenging duel between the two. Gary Neville, I suppose, with the perspective of an owner of a club as well, basically making the point that the finances have to be provided first and the competition kind of comes second, whereas Jamie Carragher was making the point that after safety, the thing that matters is the integrity of competition, i.e. by any means, as long as it's safe, football needs to be played, whether it's behind doors, whatever. I just want to get your opinion really on that balance between the integrity of the competition and the integrity of football to behave in a way that means that we don't see dozens, if not potentially hundreds of clubs fall under the wayside. Jim, what is your take on that balance, and where do you sit on the next steps that should be taken over the few weeks to help the pyramid as a whole, taking off our non-league hat here, but looking at the pyramid, what do you think would be best?
Well, what would be best again would be that there's funds that drip fed all the way through to the grassroots football from the Football League, from the Premier League. Interesting, Carragher saying that the integrity of the competition needs to be played out, but he's a Liverpool fan, isn't he? So he's not going to say anything other than that, is he? Gary Neville does put some good points, and should also just perhaps stick to his football comments rather than anything on politics and that side issue. I think this was mentioned a little bit last week. There's going to be a cut-off point, and the cut-off point was at step 2, wasn't it? They fed some money down to National South, National North sides. Obviously, Gary is a chairman, and Steve, my chairman, would have loved to have received some money from the Football League, but at some point that you have to draw the line somewhere, and that line has been drawn. Otherwise, I can't see how they can afford it.
Well, no, I've been speaking to a couple of people involved with National League clubs who are already almost planning to go part-time. So it makes you realise just how substantial this impact is. And Gary, what are your thoughts on that balance? Do you think that the competition might have to take a bit of a hit for this season to ensure that all of the clubs that are currently competing can do so, not just for this year and the next 18 months, but arguably the losses that clubs are experiencing now could have an impact on their finances for the next 5 to 10 years. It really is that substantial an impact.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I mean, we're in a family. We're all in it together. It's a football family, really. And you don't want to see clubs folding up. You don't want to see the Berries of this world, ceasing to exist. You want to preserve as many clubs as possible, because it is a game. It's a sport, and it's a sport we all love. And I think if that means the competitions having to suffer because of that, just to preserve clubs and keep them running, because they're great hubs of their local communities. If you think about each club, it's not just what they do on a Saturday; it's everything else around the game. And there's some great clubs there. And yeah, okay, they run at losses and that, but they're only able to do that because there's some very good benefactors behind them. And Colchester United are a very good example. I know the owner of that. I used to be a director there for a couple of years, and and the money that goes in there is incredible. That he's backed the club. He's owned it for 15 years, and it's an incredible investment for anyone. But the average fan probably just doesn't realise that, and doesn't want to realise that, because it's but it's very much a case of some of the lack of sustainability like that has come about because people have come in and will put their money where their mouth is, and without those people, it just there wouldn't be the losses, and perhaps the game wouldn't be as good as it is in this country. We've got a fantastic pyramid system. It's when you see the Spanish players come over here and they see just how good it is, and the number of clubs and the quality of those clubs, they just can't believe it. The league sport over in Spain is very good, but their club system and their pyramid system is nowhere near as good as ours.
Well, I think, Gary, that's a really good point to end on there. It is a football family, and certainly here at Back of the Net over the last few weeks, we've really felt that. And a massive thank you to everyone that has been subscribing to the channel. Make sure you do, because you're the first to get an alert when we go live and when our content is coming out. And for all of those of you who have sent us your comments, engaged with our polls and discussions, whether it be on Twitter or our Facebook page, thank you very much. We really do enjoy reading them all. They form our questions and our debates with our fantastic guests. Thank you guys very much for joining me today. I hope you both have fantastic weekends. Another weekend without football, we really, really do miss it. But here at Back of the Net, we will be making sure that we bring you as many shows as we can each week. And that means that we will see you again on Monday. So until then, have a fantastic weekend. Take care, and we'll see you soon.